Thank you. This is Baltimore City Council Judiciary and Legislative Investigations Committee. We're here for City Council Resolution 18-0076R, Investigative Hearing, Physical Status of the Municipal Conduit System. Before we begin, if you have a cell phone on you, please turn that to off, silent, vibrate, or any other setting which does not make noise. If you're going to be testifying today, we ask that you speak clearly into the mic because this hearing is being recorded and is being streamed live on Comcast Channel 25 as well as Charm TV. Joined to my left by City Council President Bernard C. Jack Young. To my right by Councilman Leon Pinkett from the 7th District, member of the committee. To his right, Councilman John Bullock from the 9th District, member of the committee. We're also joined by Matt Peters, staff to the committee to my right. Rebecca Tabb from City Council, she's a City Council attorney. We have Karen Stokes and Karan Banks representing Mayor Catherine Pugh. And we have Liam Davis from the Council President's Office of Legislative Services, who has been very instrumental in helping the committee prepare for this hearing. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Council President Young for introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening to everyone. I would like to thank everyone for attending tonight's hearing, looking into this critical piece of our city's infrastructure, Baltimore City Municipal Conduit System. For decades, this underground system has largely gone unnoticed. As the saying goes, out of sight, out of mind. In recent years, our roughly 700-mile municipal conduit system has come out of the shadows. In 2015, BG&E offered to purchase our municipal conduit system for $100 million. I was against this proposal back then, and my stance today has not changed. Recent action from the City Council has demonstrated that Baltimore City leadership is not interested in selling off our public assets. Instead, my hope is that this hearing will provide Baltimore City residents and stakeholders an opportunity to learn more about their conduit system. The conversation today can serve as a springboard towards fully leveraging our public system to benefit our citizens. I look forward to hearing about the history of our conduit system, its current status, and plans for the future. As Baltimore City actively studies the feasibility of municipal broadband, it is my strong belief that the municipal conduit system should be included in that conversation. So I want to thank everybody for coming and who have taken the time to attend and participate in today's hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. We've also been joined by Councilman Isaac Yitzi Schleifer from the 5th District, as well as Kara Kuntz, Director of Legislative Affairs for Council President Jack Young. And we've also been joined by Lester Davis, Deputy Chief of Staff for Council President Young. We have agency reports from Department of Transportation, Baltimore City Office of Information Technology, or BSIT, which is the former Mayor's Office of Information Technology, what most of us know formerly as MOIT, and the Baltimore Development Corporation. We're going to get started with the Department of Transportation, and my understanding is you guys have a presentation for us. And do we have someone manning that? Oh, you got a clicker.
Good evening, Council Chair, Council President, and other council members. My name is Mohammed Khalid. I'm the Chief Engineer for Baltimore City Department of Transportation. I have with me today Tavon Baxton. He's the Chief of our Conduit Division. Dhirendra Singh, he's the Chief of Fiscal. And Josh Taylor, he's our DOT Legislative Liaison. As you have mentioned, Baltimore City Department of Transportation is responsible for managing the city-owned municipal conduit system that provide access to over 40 utilities. The conduit system includes over 3.7 million feet of conduit and over 12,000 manholes. This is a huge program, and we are going to provide you with an overview of this program with a quick presentation. Tavon Baxton will lead this presentation for about 10-15 minutes time frame. So Tavon.
Good evening, Mr. Council President, Mr. Chair, the council members. My name is Tavon Braxton. Like he mentioned, I am the Conduit Division Chief. And I'd like to thank you all for giving us this opportunity just to present what I would consider to be the untold story of Baltimore City assets. This will be a brief overview, like he mentioned. Just to start out, the photos that you see is just what you would see from the conduit system if you were to remove the pavement section. You'll see ducts. There's inside of a manhole. You see cables. So what do we want to achieve today? We want to explain the municipal conduit system. A few fast facts, how the system works, the benefits of the system. We tell you how we manage the system and the condition of the system. If you look at the map, you'll notice that there's yellowish lines as well as, blue and white space. The yellow lines represent the extent of the existing conduit system. You'll notice that most of it is concentrated in the downtown area, and I'll tell you why in a second. So what is the conduit system? It's a series of manholes or underground vaults linked together by underground ducts. They form a network and they facilitate the delivery of power, telecommunications, and fiber optics to city residences and businesses. Again, this is what you typically see in the streets or the city's right-of-way. Steel manhole covers, inside that, the vaults, and the duct banks inside the vaults. So that's the infrastructure that the city owns and maintains. We own the system that houses the cabling inside of it. The cable owners are essentially our tenants. A little bit of the history. Most of what prompted the undergrounding of the system is the overhead electrical system of the 1900s. But in 1904, there was a fire that pretty much created policy that insisted that overhead electrical cabling would be placed underground. As you can see in the picture, the overhead system is pretty robust and it's kind of inhibitive of the adjacent buildings. So firefighters were basically unable to put out fires, and if you can imagine, the electrical cables just exacerbated the situation. So from that point on, the downtown district and what we refer to as the central business district now has a conduit system. There's no overhead electrical or telecommunication cabling. The system also consists of about 12,000 manholes. We're talking 700 miles of conduit that encompasses about 4,700 miles of actual duct. So how does the system work? As I mentioned, the city owns the ducts and the manholes. So a potential cable occupant or service provider would establish a conduit lease agreement with the division. In that lease agreement, it states the responsibilities of the conduit division as well as the tenant. That tenant actually pays a fee to the conduit division, and they pay per linear foot. That revenue is actually used to maintain and manage the existing system. Emphasis on existing. For expansion of the system, we rely on our developers. So what happens is a new development occurs. In turn, they require utilities to service that development. In turn, they build conduit. They build it to our standards. We have oversight over it, and at the end, we assume the ownership of that infrastructure. So what are the benefits of the system? Well, the conduit system actually fosters the connections for our safety assets, street lights, traffic signals, emergency communications. We are the owners, which means that we have we're solely responsible for the maintenance and the management of the system. a direct correlation between development and the expansion of the system. And it's also a means to manage the public right-of-way. You know, as Mr. Muhammad mentioned, there's over 40 lessees that occupy the system. And to have all 40 occupants in one system is actually a great means of managing the right-of-way. Not to mention, in regards to electrical service, it's a means to reduce the likelihood of storm-related outages because the system is underground. So our mission is to provide a good, reliable, and efficient conduit system. You know, our responsibilities basically include oversight and approval of all conduit design, construction, and cable installation. That includes the evaluation of temporary use of right-of-way permit plans, developer agreement plans, any construction towards development, and even our capital improvements. So in 2017, the conduit lessee rate increased from 97 cents to $2 per linear foot. In the years of 2014 to 16, just for example, you know, the operations budget was about $8 million. As you see, most of the budget went towards operations, reactive maintenance and such. But there was only $6 million put towards capital maintenance. I mean, as a result, we became really good at reactive maintenance. That's also the bad news. We were unable to, you know, indulge in the planning to do proactive maintenance. So since the rate increase, we've been able to do that. You know, we've slightly increased the operations budget, but we've increased the capital budget significantly. As a result, you know, the section has graduated to a division. We're increasing our staff. We acquired a new facility, which is actually shown in the slide. And that facility will house the engineering as well as the maintenance components of the division. As far as the work, we've managed to decrease our customer service requests for clearing duct obstructions for our lessees. And we're moving on to proactive maintenance, you know, true asset management for a robust facility like this. The current condition of the system, be mindful, it's 100 years old. So it was constructed of, you know, materials that have basically exceeded its design life. Many of the ducts were made of a material called Orangeburg, which is basically tree, like condensed tree pulp. As you can imagine, that just cannot withstand 100 years. So many of our service requests are the result of these materials. The other is terracotta, which in an archaic type of material. It's resilient, however, any slight differential settlements or, you know, subsidence could result in, you know, cracks in that material. That too has exceeded its design life, so any rehabilitation work that we do would consist of concrete encased PVC ducts as well as reinforced concrete manholes. 80% of the system is made up of this material, and it's our goal to strategically prioritize the parts of the system that will make the system comprehensively, you know, more optimal and more useful for our conduit lessees. We've also implemented our asset management to pretty much capture the data from inspection that's required to strategize and prioritize these components of the system. So the significant activities within the program, we do split duct construction. That's basically the means to rehabilitate that sections of the conduit that were made of the obsolete materials, but we can encase those cables in place without severing the service and make it up to standard, bring it to a more reliable state. Of course, there's the reactive service request repairs. Those will never end. It's just the nature of the beast. It's an old system, but the goal is to minimize those repairs. Of course, the manhole reconstruction. As I mentioned, all manholes that are currently masonry and not up to standard for today's code will now be upgraded to reinforced concrete manholes, which will have at least a 50-year service life. In the asset management methodology, asset management to us is a way of doing business. It's a way of using data to drive decision-making for capital repairs and rehabilitation and strategic planning. So the conduit improvement plan is basically a spoken hub system. We've pretty much identified the major transmission corridors that will rehabilitate to make the system more efficient for lessee use. The goal is to minimize the new construction that's necessary to accommodate service provider, their servicing locations. As you can see, the green is existing conduit that we intend to rehabilitate, and there's green spokes that actually extend into the limits of the city. What's shown in burgundy represents what we want to encourage developers to begin the construction of. That's proposed conduit where there currently does not exist, where conduit currently does not exist. But comprehensively, that focus would optimize the system for conduit use. So in closing, we've come a significant way. Since the increase in revenue, we've made leaps and bounds. As I mentioned, we adopted a proactive mantra for doing business. The asset management is fostering data-driven decision-making for us, and we're now able to rehabilitate large magnitudes or stretches of conduit. Once before, we didn't have the resources to do that. We're now able to do that and align our projects with many other outside agencies, other utilities, and even departmental sections for optimal, complete street type projects. And that's it in a nutshell. I welcome any questions.
Thank you. And we've also been joined by Councilman Robert Stokes, member of the committee, 12th District. Before we do questions, colleagues, we're going to get to the other two agencies. Larissa's BDC? Yes. Do you want to come up and grab a seat wherever you'd like? And yeah, I mean, you can sit up here if you want, but go up to the podium to speak, please. And you can move that, you pull that thing. That's all right.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Council President. Good afternoon, Chair Costello, and the rest of the City Council representatives that are here. BDC did submit a response to this bill, and I will take a couple of minutes to read our response. The Baltimore Development Corporation has reviewed City Council Bill 18-0076R, which requests a discussion of the physical condition of the municipal conduit system, its current reach, maintenance plans, and any plans to expand the system. BDC has reviewed this bill and vigorously supports the Council's desire to understand this asset called the Baltimore Municipal Conduit System, particularly as it pertains to expansion of the system. Revenue generated from the conduit fees primarily manage and maintain the existing system. Current expansion of the municipal conduit system comes as a result of land disposition agreements negotiated with developers, obligating them, quote, to have the sole responsibility at their own expense to prepare property for redevelopment, including obtaining and/or relocating as needed all utilities in accordance with the land disposition agreement. The developer is also obligated to perform all public and private utility and appurtenance construction, relocation, and adjustments, such as water mains, sanitary sewer, storm drains, and electrical conduits on the property. This is a direct quote that we have in all of our land disposition agreement documents. Additionally, current franchise agreements, which is the government's permission with a private entity to use public streets and rights of way for private profits, are required, quote, to fix in said ordinance the said compensation at the largest amount it may be able to obtain. And this is a quote from the Baltimore City Charter. This arrangement does not lend itself to provide easier and cheaper new services under the continued city ordinance and begs to be reviewed. BDC strongly supports City Council Bill number 18-0076R. Thank you.
Thank you. BCIT, Caitlin.
Good evening. My name is Caitlin McCauley. I'm here on behalf of Baltimore City Office of Information and Technology. Thank you for providing me the opportunity to testify this evening on Council Bill 18-0076R. BCIT works closely in coordination with the Department of Transportation Conduit Division during the installation of fiber for CCTV cameras and other projects throughout the city to determine the availability of duct banks within the conduit system. However, BCIT does not play an active role or direct responsibility to maintain the physical condition of the system. We do follow the same guidelines for relocating cables as other lessees. BCIT is currently in the process of developing a citywide fiber broadband and small cells master plan in collaboration with the Department of Transportation and CTC Technology and Energy. We anticipate this plan being completed by the end of this calendar year. We will have someone from the project team from CTC available for the hearing on Resolution 18-0075 for when that occurs so they can speak more specifically on that project. Otherwise, that's everything we have this evening. Any questions?
Thank you. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to go back to BDC. The last sentence that you have here. I want you to explain what you mean. This arrangement does not lend itself to provide easier and cheaper new service under continued city ownership and begs to be reviewed. What are you saying there?
That under the current charter, my understanding is that the city is prohibited under the franchise agreements to use its revenue for anything other than maintenance and maintenance of the system. So when you talk about profit, to have a profit beyond the direct costs for operations, that it is currently prohibited under the current franchise agreements. So that the arrangements currently, as they are set in the charter, make it extremely difficult for the city to be able to do that. Okay. But I'm not from the law department. The law department is here. They can talk about that or not, or at another time. Okay,
no problem. We'll discuss that later. This is for the Transportation Department. How much this transportation, you can go.
Am I good?
Yeah, you're good.
Thank you.
With the money that BG&E give to our conduit system, how much is that yearly or is that just a one-time fee?
It's yearly.
Yearly. So they give us how much yearly?
What's that?
How much do they give us yearly?
Currently, 25 million per
25
year.
million? Okay. And other users, they give money too, right?
That's correct.
So if you can provide to the committee, because I'm not going to ask you that right here, the total amount of money that we receive from our customers in our conduit system. And I'm more interested in how we can make the conduit system, or bring it into 21st century. And I want to know, have you all engaged minority and women-owned businesses to do work in the infrastructure, and what kind of work are you doing in the infrastructure?
Sure. So all of our construction and professional service contracts have the local hiring requirements. Our consultants and contractors, we work closely with the Mayor's Office of Employment Development on opportunities to advertise new job listings and facilitate job interviews for the hiring of local city residents. Our work pretty much consists of concrete duct construction, concrete reinforced manholes, roadway restoration, all the engineering disciplines associated with design. A lot of inspection work, construction management, pretty much every discipline within the construction industry.
Okay, we use minority and women-owned business in everything we do in the conduit system.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. How do we regulate whether I have a business? How do we regulate whether I'm subbing it out to other entities? How do we check on that?
Well, we have compliance officers. The agency has compliance officers that hold our consultants and contractors accountable to those things.
Okay. Because at one time, I know that a company had given us information and gave us a little film where that was actually happening without DOT's permission. At the time, the mayor, when I presented the information to her, wasn't interested in looking into that. That's why I'm asking that we take a closer look at what's happening inside of our conduit system, because some people and companies are subbing out to other entities and making money, and we're not receiving it. Now, what would you say is the condition of our conduit? Is it need a whole overhaul, or is it sufficient for what we want to do?
I would say it's sufficient for what we want to do. There are many components of the asset, like I mentioned, has exceeded its design life, but it's functional. So that just means that, at any moment something could happen. There can be some failures, but failure has different faces. Many times they're resolvable, things that we can address in maintenance. But to bring everything up to standard is a tall task, but it's not necessary because the system is functioning.
Okay, so with the $25 million that we get each year, what have we spent it on?
Well, just as of recently, we received that type of revenue beginning in 2017. And I'll need to confirm, but I think we've spent close to $20 million in FY18.
Okay, because BG&E at one time was saying they didn't want to give any more money until we used the money that we had. Understood. So I want to make sure that we use every dime to upgrade the system and to make sure that we're checking on other entities that's in our system to make sure that we're getting all the revenue we should be getting.
Indeed.
That's all for right now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to go back to two of the President's questions. We've also been joined by Councilman Brandon Scott, 2nd District member of the committee. Tavon, if you could, getting back to the fees that we're charging annually, can you talk about what that agreement is, the 6-year agreement, and how much we're actually charging? Because I think you have some general, I don't want to call them specifics, but you do have some general dollar figures in terms of what the city should be bringing in revenue each year, correct?
That's correct. So I think the agreement you're referring to is the settlement agreement with BG&E. Yeah. So that's the agreement that solidified $2 per linear feet for all lessees. We approximate, because of that, we'll receive close to $30 million in total. We pretty much plan to appropriate you know, 12 million of that to our operating budget and 20 to our capital plan on each year within the 6-year term.
So year one is, my understanding was year one was 31 million, year 2 and 3 the same, and then year 4 jumps up to 35 or 36.
You're correct. Actually, in 2020, the rate becomes $2.20.
Okay.
So there will be an increase.
So that brings it up another, what is that, a 10% increase on 30 million, so 33 million total?
That's correct.
Okay. And Victor, I wanted to touch on one of the council president's other questions for BDC. If you could explain to everyone what you just explained to me about the question for BDC.
Right. I think BDC, easily confuses the franchise fee with actually the conduit fee. So when we grant a franchise to use our city right-of-way, which you need to have in order to get into our conduit system, we charge a fee. And usually that fee is not, even though it says in the charter we're supposed to get the maximum amount, oftentimes we don't really go for the maximum amount, we go for some lower rate. That's the franchise fee, which is separate from the conduit rate fee, which is the rental rate that you use for actually using the conduit as opposed to just being on the right-of-way. So, and that fee actually is dedicated under the finance department. We've got, under the BGE agreement that we established back in 1903, we're supposed to be setting up a separate fund for that. And so all those conduit rates that are paid, not the franchise fee, but the conduit rates go into this special fund that is turned around and used entirely for the conduit maintenance. And that, once again, is part of our settlement agreement, but actually it comes back all the way to our 1903 agreement with BGE saying that all fees have to be used for the maintenance of the conduit.
Okay. Thank you. Councilman Pinkett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our background information says that back in 2015, the Board of Estimates approved an increase of the rate to $3.33. What was that based on? I mean, like, how did we come to the $3.33? Clear, the background information also says that was contested, and ultimately we settled at the $2, I guess, per linear foot rate. What was the justification for the $3.33? And if that was the real number, I mean, how did we get to the 2, and is there still gap out there?
Well, there was an assessment performed to try to achieve rehabilitation of 15% of the system annually. Mm-hmm. So the $3.33 was based on that because we historically we were only touching maybe 3%. So of course there's going to be, it will take us longer to achieve that amount with the reduced rate of $2 instead of $3.33.
So, but the background information says that part of the challenge was that it was thought that this fee, this increase in fee, generated a revenue that was beyond what was necessary for the maintenance of the conduit. Is that actual, or is that not? Or am I asking? I should be asking the lawyer.
Well, I mean, like Taven, I was actually involved with a lot of that back and forth with BGE. We also had, besides BGE was suing us, we had 12 telecommunication firms also suing us at the time over the conduit rate. Originally, the conduit rate, when we first made the first assessment, and I know Taven would probably remember this, the amount was $5.63 is what the rate should have been. When we took another closer look at that, we dropped it down to $3.33, which is what really went into the BOE approval rate. And that is essentially which we thought was a reasonable rate to refurbish the conduit in the near future. Ultimately, we had to settle with BGE. They were going at us in all sorts of ways, and we settled it at $2. The idea was that we were going to make improvements. It was going to be a slower process, but we were going to make improvements over the 99-cent rate that we had just the year before. We were certainly going to make improvements with $2. We certainly would have preferred $3.33.
But, and I'm just going by the slide. One of the slides said that we're the owners of the conduit, correct? So, being that we're the owners, we don't get to determine what we believe to be the total cost to maintain what we own. So that somebody else tells us what the cost is to maintain our property.
At the moment, when the
That's what it sounds like.
the negotiations,
Like somebody coming into my house and telling me what's going to cost for me to operate my own home, and they don't live there. They just rent.
that is a position that we actually took. But at the end of the day, we had to negotiate this rate. This was in court, and the idea is that the opposition thought that we couldn't spend the amount of money that we were asking. They thought it was too high. So ultimately, we settled on $2. And once again, that rate, or it goes to $2.22, $2.20, that rate stops in 2022. And then we go back to zero. We have to go back and figure out what the rate actually would be. There's a true up. So if we don't spend the money, to get to your point, Mr. President, if we don't spend the money, we have to give it back. So we're trying to make sure that we spend all the money, and there will be no true up. But that occurs in 2022, and at which case the agreement that we have, the settlement agreement, stops. And we go back to the table, and under the terms of the agreement, we have to negotiate that with BGE and the 12 telecommunication firms that were in that lawsuit.
And so based upon this, we're limited or restricted to doing $32 million worth of work annually. Like, we couldn't even go above. You couldn't do any more work because you're restricted to that amount.
That's correct.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah, can I?
Yeah, go
quick
ahead.
add on to that. Can we spend other dollars in the budget, other capital dollars on the conduit system? We're not prohibited from just spending. Got it. Thank you, Councilman.
Right. So we would have to spend more of our own money to prove that there's a greater expense annually, but we can't do that. Is there a difference between maintenance and expansion?
Yes. When we
So this money won't allow for expansion. It just allows for maintenance of what we currently have.
That's correct.
Would it, if we expanded on our own, would our expansion be folded into the maintenance?
Yes.
So we should hurry up and expand.
Well, ideally, yes. We're just contractually obligated to utilize the funds for the existing system. Now, we can, like I said, work with developers and encourage them to help us expand our system, and that's what we're trying to do.
And if I can ask just one last question, is the I guess expansion of our conduit system, is that directly related to our ability to get broadband to communities throughout the city?
I believe conduits would have to be at the heart of that effort.
And I guess that's why I was talking about the expansion, because I mean the map that you had clearly, you know, most of the conduit was in the center of the city, and so part of this should be, advancing our efforts to get as much conduit out of the core of the city so we can expand, access to broadband, equally throughout, remaining parts of our city.
Indeed, the whole premise of the capital improvement plan is to extend the system out, as optimally as possible, so that developers, there'll be minimal construction for their last leg to provide these services.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Scott. Oh, I'm sorry, Council President has a follow-up.
Yeah, I want to go back to what my colleague had mentioned, and when we were talking about the race, because I wasn't for, I was for fighting, because when I looked at other cities, what they are paying other cities and what they're paying us is really, I'm not going to say criminal, but really not fair, So when we go back in 22, whether I'm here or not, I think we should make sure we get the maximum what we can get based on what they pay other municipalities. Because everybody always trying to lowball Baltimore, And what Councilman Pinkett said was, we need to go in there and expand. Because number one, we want to make sure that we can have a public process, a partnership, so that we can offer broadband at a cheaper rate to people who actually live in the city. And I think, a lot of people take advantage of us, the city of Baltimore. And I'm asking you to expand as quick as possible, because in Department of Public Works, we've been under this consent decree forever, and they can't even tell us how many miles they have done. So I don't want you all to be like that. I want you to move as quick as you can and expand this system. And if you had to get more capital money from our capital budget, we need to do that. We need to move with urgency. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. President. Councilman Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The President actually hinted on exactly what I was going to be talking about, and just asking as always, asking, did we look at what was charged in other cities? Because like Councilman Pinkett, I feel like we allowed someone to come into our house and tell us how much they're going to pay us for us to be there. And I think all of us know that BGE doesn't ask us how much we think our electricity bill should be every month. We should be comparing that out to other places. So did we look at what they charge to other cities? And can, especially for the new members of the council who weren't here at the time, you guys provide that list so that they can see the dollar amounts that are going to the other cities for their conduit, and especially those of similar size?
We definitely did investigate the rates in other jurisdictions, and what we found is that the rates range from 25 cents per linear foot to $7 per linear foot, but the average low end was about $2.20, while the average high end was $3.91. So, you know, the current rate is even on the lower end of the spectrum for the median.
Yeah, I'm going to say that at the end of the day, while we put those numbers on the table when we began these negotiations, or actually not negotiations, when we said what our fee was going to be, we did say this is what these other places are charging. This is why, and that is not why we want to charge our fee. We want to charge our fee because we actually have maintenance costs that will jack it up to $5 or $3.33. So those positions were taken very strongly. At the end of the day, one of the reasons why we, something the committee should know, one of the reasons why we ended up settling on this particular thing is because BGE particularly said that they're going to take it to the PSC, and whatever we charge on the conduit rate above 99 cents, they were going to get charged back to all the utility payers in the city. So that became an argument, that became an issue that we certainly wanted to avoid. A settlement seemed to be the way to go.
Yeah, thank you for that, and I appreciate that, but I also think that that's the instance, in my opinion, where we should have went to court, right? You can't be bullied by someone just because they're going to threaten us with that. That's an instance where I believe we should have went to court and fought them on behalf of our citizens, just because that they haven't been paying what they should have been for all these years, and now we want to get them back in more line of what they should have been paying. We shouldn't just cow down to the threat of them going and passing it off to our citizens in their ever-increasing bill hikes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Councilman Scott, I was for fighting, because I know we probably would have won based on what other cities are paying. Have the city ever challenged BG&E rate increases with the PSC as city government? Because we should do that too.
I'm not aware that we've ever challenged whatever rates they wanted to go for.
Well, we should, because when we were trying to get the money, they were talking about just having us, the residents in Baltimore City, charge us more, when everybody around the state that has BG&E use BG&E. And I think that was a bully tactic, and I think we should, when they have rate increase, because we represent the city, okay? And I think our law department is supposed to represent the mayor and the city council, even though we have our own independent council that works along with you guys. I think sometimes we need to challenge those rate increases. Thank you. Since they want to play that.
Councilman Stokes.
I just want to comment, for a city that's 60% African American. My question is, how many African American contractors have contracts with this? One is because the state has an MBE for just African Americans. Baltimore City do not have that. So do you have information to show how many African Americans have contracts? One, and you talked about the Mayor's Office of Employment Development. Can you show who's been employed from Youth Works and what they look like? Can we get that information also?
I'm not sure, but I'll try to find out and convey that information for you.
But you say you work through Mayor's Office of Employment Works. You don't have the data to show who was hired?
Well, we have the subcontractors and the minority consultants and subcontractors, but minority doesn't always suggest African American as you're insinuating. So we can give you the minority data,
Okay.
but not necessarily, those that are African American.
Well, what about the contracts then? Is that the same process? How many African Americans have contracts?
I'm not sure. I can try to find that information for you, though.
Thank you.
We'll make sure we get that information. Councilman Slifer.
Yeah, so a couple questions just for clarity. So the fees you said have to be used for the system. So is that the franchise fees or just the lessee fees?
It's the conduit leasing fees.
Just the leasing fees. So where does the franchise fee money go?
It goes to the general fund.
And all those funds that come in, is that only for the capital maintenance, or is that also for the operations?
Both capital and maintenance.
For both.
Yes.
Okay. And I know you touched on it briefly, but can you just elaborate a little bit more as to how the operations budget, like why it increased by 50% from the 2014-2016 period to the following year, 2017-18?
Sure. As you can imagine, from transitioning from a section to a division, we're upping the costs associated with new employees, new equipment, a whole new facility. So we need the resource to accommodate the capital work that we're proposing, and we increased it 50% because of that.
So are the outputs? I mean, because looking at the budget, there wasn't too much information offered as to the outputs that you guys are going to be judged off of for the different budget years. But is there like any data to show the increase in outputs that we're receiving for such a large increase in the operating budget?
That data can be provided.
Because I mean, a 50% increase, I can imagine that if any other city department or anybody else had I tell you, if the city council got a 50% operations increase, people would want to know what that money was for. What, are you just hiring new people? Are you guys really top heavy of a lot of executives you just hired, or are we putting people to work? Are we getting things done? And so that's the kind of things that if you can provide to the committee some more detail to what that looks like. You hiring 50% more employees, or is it, all equipment based? Is it, adding new positions because you became an agency, and just giving some more detail into that. And then also going into this, because we've spoken a lot about the fee rates and whether or not we're utilizing the money, and if it was more revenue, would we be able to spend it? I'm just curious, maybe you can answer somebody else, what other agencies are affected by the work that you're doing? So I assume some of the costs might be absorbed by DOT or DPW or other related agencies when certain of the projects or works impact them. And so I'm just curious how that works.
Well, essentially, conduits is a utility. So we have to coordinate with other utility agencies. That was a big component that was missing, before we acquired the resources. But now, we're doing a lot of, proactive and planning and conceptual designing to incorporate all those agencies to minimize the effects of the work that we're doing.
So do we know, based on, okay, so we see that your operations budget's 12 million and your capital maintenance is 20 million. Do we know how many other millions of dollars the city as a whole is putting into these projects and things that are outside of your direct operations and maintenance budgets?
Well, the city, The funding source is used for the existing system. And what we do is we try to align, our capital improvement projects with that of other agencies. So comprehensively, we're adding to those projects. They don't need to, utilize their funds for our projects. We add to theirs that make it more complete.
So you're saying your schedule goes squarely based on the work of other agencies or maybe some of these other utilities or?
No, but it's one of the factors that we consider in prioritizing our work.
No, I understand about priority, but I'm saying in reality, I mean, I'm sure we've heard and we experience this in every district where a street gets repaved and then the following year, let's say BGE comes. I have it right now in my district. I'd say a large portion of my district is being ripped up for new gas lines, and as much as we appreciate some new shiny gas lines, there's a lot of streets that are being ripped up now that were repaved over the past 5 years, and I assume when you replace gas lines across multiple communities, it didn't get planned 6 months ago. And so I understand that the hope is to always do that, but I think the reality is that you guys have certain maintenance and work that you need to do. And I assume that when that happens, there's other costs involved. So if you guys have to, let's say, dig up a street in order to get to some systems, is DOT coming in behind that and repaving that, or is that repaving coming out of your budget?
So if I understand what you are saying, getting at is we need to build it once, and we need to kind of phase this work so that when the street is done, it's done for many years to come, and BG&E or some other utility company is not going to come and tear that street down next year. And we are doing that right now through our Investas program. We are layering BG&E work and DPW work and coordinating those works so that we phase it in such a way so that the street gets torn up once and not every year, like in many areas that have been happening.
Right. So when you guys have to rip up a street, let's just get back to that.
Okay.
And I'm sure there's plenty of other examples. It could be a sewer system, it could be DPW, it could be DOT, whatever it is. Are all expenses related to every single part of your maintenance project all exclusively coming out of your division?
So our work is the conduits that's in the street, and that is ours, and we are responsible for maintaining that and repairing that and reconstructing that. So the opportunity could be is if BG&E or some other utility company is cutting the street, after we are done, maybe the final paving we can do together or something like that. There are some opportunities there. So we are talking about those kind of things, but as far as the conduit system is concerned, it's really our responsibility, and we really don't know how to transfer that.
Can I add to that? So, as he mentioned, we are responsible for the conduit infrastructure, but incidental to the construction or rehabilitation of the conduit, we do restore the areas that we affect. So we do repave the road according to the street policy, or that could be upgrading an ADA ramp that we may have affected due to our construction, or a sidewalk.
Okay,
So that does come out of our budget.
Gotcha. So all work related to that exclusively is coming in, all the revenues are coming into you, but also all the expenses are being bared by you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Council President.
Thank you. I want to go back to the part where if we don't use the money, we have to give it back to BG&E. Do we have to give money back to any other entity that's in our conduit? Because rent is rent, and I don't think we should have to give them a dime back. If they pay us, it's our money, and we can use it to carry over into the next fiscal year, or when they give us more money, so we do more. So when we go to renegotiate, they can't set the terms for us. They can't tell us if we don't use the money that we got to give it back to them. That's like them not paying rent to us. So I hope as we go forward that we not allow them or any company for that reason to dictate to us if we don't use the money, we'll give it back to them. That's crazy.
If I may, I believe the reason why we have the true up which we've been trying to get away from. The reason why we have the true-up is because the original agreements back from 1903 said they could only be used for maintenance. So BGE wants to have us prove that the money that we collect is only used for maintenance. And that creates the whole need, according to BGE, for the true-up. So that's what's on the table.
We'll now transition to public testimony. The first name I have is Felix Dialoso. If you would state your name, sir.
My name is Felix Dialoso. A little bit about me, my background. I have about 30+ years experience in underground conduit systems. I basically worked with Baltimore City, BG&E, and a number of other companies that have built the system, not only the duct system here in Baltimore, but also the chilled water system and the steam system, along with the Verizon conduit. I do support anything that can upgrade the system, representing fiber companies, owning a telecommunications company. I involved with a lot of the traffic systems, the pulling the fiber optics for the city, pulling it for the traffic systems. It's been a struggle. It's been a struggle since probably the late 90s. I did come up with a solution, and that's what I'm here to offer City Council. In 1999, I proposed a franchise agreement with the City of Baltimore called HarborLink, Inc. It took 3 years to get through the O'Malley administration, which was City Council Bill 10-0521. It was signed off in May of 2002 by Mayor O'Malley, City Council President Sheila Dixon, I believe was Controller Joan Pratt at the time. I do have a copy of the franchise. Things have changed in the past 18 years since this franchise was signed off. I knew if I sat on it long enough, it would be a time the city needed this. I've met with a lot of the developers, a lot of the contractors, and understand the frustration. In order for Baltimore, including Under Armour, other places like Google, not only the data centers that want to come here and new businesses and expand businesses, also part of the franchise agreement allows conduit to be given to Baltimore City for its free use, and also a fiber optic cable, which would be used for whatever use they have for the schools, libraries, youth centers. That's what it was basically originally designated with. The gentleman at the time was Thurman Zelikofer, who I worked hand in hand with practically 3 years when we going back and forth trying to get this. What I would like to do, and probably not the time now, is to see if I could get your attention so we can sit down, go through this franchise. I need to make the investors, because you're looking at $15 to maybe $25 million in a few different phases. This isn't going to take away from the city conduit, and it's not going to provide a solution to your ongoing issues. What we will do is HarborLink can provide a solution today as we continue to build it out that would allow possibly a 10-year period for Baltimore City to revamp their conduit system.
If you can bring your testimony to a close. If you can bring your testimony to a close.
Yes, and basically, this would be only telecommunications. It would be a secured locking manhole system. I have a section built that the city made me build back in 2002. It's behind the 111 Marketplace, which is called a Carrier Hotel. The original design is designed to connect all the major fiber optic hubs. I've also been in contact with DoIT, the state fiber, and if you look at DoIT's website and their maps, they come to the city line on the north, the east, the south, and the west, and their fiber's curled up in the manhole, and they can't access it. The city wants to be able to access it. I know some of the city members that have talked to me about it. You can't get to it because the Baltimore City conduit system is exhausted. And basically, what I'd like to do is to see if I can
So if you
take
could
this a
submit
step
that,
further.
if you could submit that to us, we'll make certain that everyone on this committee, if you could submit what you have to us, we'll make certain that everyone on the committee gets it.
Yeah, you have to
Oh,
follow
okay,
me.
I'm sorry. So,
I struggled a little bit listening, so I mean, if I
no,
miss something,
so
I
we'll
do
make
apologize.
certain that everyone on the committee as well as on the council get that, and we thank you for your testimony, sir.
Yeah,
Who he needs to meet with. I don't want him going.
Okay. So you, in your testimony, you said that you need to meet.
no,
with
I just wanted to, I just got wind of this on Monday, so I really didn't have a lot of time to prepare for it.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, you have my contact on my sign-in sheet. I'm available at any time.
So Tavon, can we have you coordinate a meeting with this gentleman so that you could hear the proposal that he has? Okay.
And then get back to this committee.
And if you could just report back to us, from that meeting. Thank you,
Okay, I
sir.
thank President and City Council members for your time.
Patricia Truex.
Hello, my name is Patricia Truex, and I'm pleased to be here. President Young and Councilman Costello. And I've been interested in the public transportation for quite some time. I am a rider on the system. And, I'm interested in all the things that go on here, because I can see that there's money involved and things like that. It takes money of all kinds from all different sources to make the budget come together. And so I'll be continuing to follow this.
Thank you, ma'am. Jason Harderbeck.
Good evening. Council President, Councilman Costello, Pinkett, and everybody else who is still here, rest of the council. My name is Jason Harderbeck. I'm here testifying in the context of serving as the city's broadband coordinator from 2015 to 2017. And that was a position that was created as a recommendation from a Smarter City Task Force where we looked at a number of different issues and topics, broadband being one. So hopefully I can add a little bit more context to this conversation, and especially where it pertains to increasing broadband penetration in Baltimore. We looked at a lot of different municipalities and systems and best practices and other assets or advantages that other cities had. Good news is Baltimore owns a number of interesting assets, including a conduit system. The bad news is Baltimore City owns a conduit system. A system, as we've heard testimony earlier, was really designed for electrical power distribution over 100 years ago, not really for the needs of telecom, which by itself isn't really a problem unless your goal is to actually increase the usage of said conduit for new services. There are a number of ways that Baltimore City could expand the use of that system. They don't include increasing the fees. It really is about incentivizing the use of that asset in conjunction with other assets. For example, one of the things that we found was that the current conduit fee is based on a lineal foot, basically a measure of length as opposed to volume, as we know. Whether it's a single fiber or it's a bundle of 1,000 fibers, it's essentially the same fee. So what that does is serve as a disincentive for network builders, especially those who are not incumbents, to bring additional service to the city. There's also, because the conduit system is a requirement, it's, as we've heard, it's expensive. It's expensive in terms of building and adding capacity, and it is basically a system that is rigid, and it's both in physical construction as well as policy. In other municipalities that don't have the benefit or the luxury of a conduit system, there are other ways of running fiber, for example, that is not allowed in Baltimore, whether it's aerial or it's microtrenching or other technologies. I'm not here to debate the pros and cons of that, but what I would suggest is this, as the council examines this issue in more detail, to think about what the outcome, what the desired outcome is, rather than what the constraints that we have currently. I mean, conduit is an asset. If we choose to use it as an asset, it can also be a limitation, which is what I think if you talk to many of the providers, they can give you more specific flavors to the challenges working within that framework.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a question? Jason, can you talk a little bit more about the comment you made earlier on about using linear foot as a measurement, and I guess you were comparing linear distance versus volume that's inside of the
Certainly.
conduit.
And you know, Tavon can probably give us more specifics on that, but the way that the city charges for conduit is on a lineal basis, right? The length, regardless of how much is actually in that, you know, in that unit of measure. So, again, anecdotally, but speaking to a number of different providers, that means that there's no incentive to run small amounts of fiber. You want to run the entire length, and that tends to use up a lot more capacity than you might otherwise have. So I know Hugh is in. I don't know if Hugh is testifying. Are you planning to testify? So Hugh can actually speak to that in more practical standpoint, what that means for somebody like Hugh whose business is telecom. One suggestion or option is to look at how we charge and incentivize the use of that conduit in a more efficient manner rather than consuming it all.
So essentially you're arguing that by de-incentivizing others to operate within the conduit, as a result, maybe it's Hugh Bethel or anyone else who's in this arena, will pack as much as humanly possible in the conduit, therefore taking up valuable real estate, if you will, underground, and essentially not prohibiting, but not allowing for additional players to
That's
enter
correct.
the arena. Quick question for Tavon and Victor, if I may, Mr. Chair. Is that something that, because after 2022, we're going to have to renegotiate, correct? Is that something that's on the radar, what Jason is sharing? Like that you guys are thinking through that?
That is definitely, I know because we've talked about it with Jason before, so we've definitely discussed the possibility at that point. There's been no movement, unless Tavon knows something that I don't, there's been no movement to change that.
Do you guys not concur with what Jason is saying?
I'm still a bit confused about the argument, but it sounds as though his issue is that, you know, other users of the system will, you know, kind of try to monopolize the available space in the conduit system with their facilities. I don't know that that's the case because they'll only utilize a duct that they require. And as he mentioned, for fiber optics, they can have a bundle of, thousands of strands. So there'd be no need to really utilize other ducts. Now, if the existing system doesn't, bear the capacity, because it's already, occupied, they still have the ability to add upon that infrastructure. It is somewhat of a cost, but it won't happen everywhere. So the upfront cost that they would typically, have to bear to build a new system is negated.
Upfront cost they would have to bear to build a new system is negated. Okay. I guess I want to hear what some of the other folks say, but Jason, is there widespread support for that argument within your community?
No, and I'm not here to advocate for a necessarily a change to how we charge for conduit, other than to just bring that up. And I know there's been discussions in the past. I've had a couple of small network providers and startups, especially when the conduit fee went up, even from 97 cents to $2. There's no incentive to build on spec either, right? So there was dark fiber that companies were paying conduit fees on that could no longer afford to bear that upfront, that annual cost, with the hopes of actually providing systems. So it kind of comes back to that, my first point, and that is if the city's goal is to incentivize additional competition in broadband, whether it's something the city provides or private institutions, and perhaps looking at conduit as a component of a larger system, including the city's existing dark fiber, vertical assets, and policy as tools in that toolbox.
Got it. Mr. Chair, my last question, and thank you for indulging me. Victor, Tavon, when we switched the price from 97 cents to $2, obviously that's a considerable jump. I think a lot of people would argue, including myself, it should be more, but nonetheless, we can all agree it's a considerable jump when you double the cost. Do we know if anyone abandoned what they had within the conduit system as a result of that?
Actually, when that amount was on the table, the telecommunications, I remember sitting in a room with 10 telecommunication firms, and that argument certainly was made, but none of them dropped out as a result of the increase. So whether or not Jason had conversations with others, maybe they were prevented, but the 10 that were in that room were very vociferous that that price was going to price them out, the $3.33. Well, the $2 did not.
Conduit's not the only area we hear that argument. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Jason, I know you trying to, figure out how we can help smaller businesses get into the conduit system. But have you looked at other cities to see what they have done, and have they looked at what you're saying, and are any of them doing it?
Yes. So I'm
talking cities that own their conduit.
Correct. So I'm not sure if we look which cities. So conduit was never viewed as the driver of this. It was really a tool. A lot of cities, especially cities with less developed infrastructure, so think newer cities farther west, actually started with overhead or less expensive ways of installing fiber. The most successful systems, back up, municipal broadband was never the first. In most cases, was never the first choice, unless the city had a very well-developed utility infrastructure and the customer service and the billing, et cetera, in place. But the more successful programs or systems tended to be very much driven by policy and incentivizing this kind of activity. They also all had, regardless of the social good, they all were driven by economic development initiatives as well. So a big part of this, and I know Larissa spoke to this earlier, was fiber cells and incentivized companies to build or to develop in areas that that may not have may not be the downtown areas right now. So everything we looked at was really how cities they looked at broadband as an essential requirement of economic and social development, and they looked at what they could do to incentivize that to happen. And competition always resulted in better service and lower prices.
Okay, because I'm really interested in how we can help startup companies, because when you have the startup companies and as they grow, they tend to grow by hiring people who actually live in the city. So any way that we can offer any incentives to startup business, I'm all in for that, as long as it does not cause problems with the other companies saying, oh, you did that for them, so you got to do it for us.
May I add to something that Jason said too? The industry tells us that if we have conduit available it reduces the cost of bringing broadband to an urban area by 80%. So it's a huge asset when we have conduit available into the rollout of broadband.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it. Hugh Bethel.
Mr. Council President, Chairman, and members of the council. As Jason said, my name is Hugh Bethel. I own a company called Port Networks. We're a local internet service provider, and we are poster child, the company that would occupy space in the conduits if it were available. I want to show you one thing. It will be hard to see, but this is a map of North Baltimore, north of Hopkins, where we have a couple of buildings that are very interested in getting fiber. The red line, the red type across the whole area says no available duct path found. That's what we get back from the conduit section when we ask for any path in. I want to talk to you about why that is. The first thing I want to underscore is something Jason said about the linear foot problem. Imagine that you are running a hotel, and you're only going to charge the guests according to how long they stay, not how many rooms they occupy. Right? I'm going to take up a whole floor if I can, because you're only charging me for the number of nights. And that's the problem we run into again and again. People have bound up whole sections of conduit. I can put in a little fiber that is only a quarter of an inch thick, and it can carry pretty much the entire world's capacity of internet traffic. Or I can put in a big, thick, honking tube with that little fiber inside it. So if I ever need to put anything else in later, I just go and put it right down the tube. It doesn't cost me anything extra to put that plastic tube in instead of that little fiber. But what happens is I've excluded all my competition, because in many places around the city, the conduit has either collapsed or it was small to begin with, and there's only so much room to get through to where you want to go. And if you're allowing people to take up as much room as they want, guess what? There is precisely one company that can service Under Armour and South Baltimore, because they got their fiber in first, and now the conduit's full. Does that make sense for competition? I don't think so. But we don't have a pricing system that discourages that. We have a pricing system that encourages that. The other thing I want to highlight is the council president's question about how much people are paying us and what they're paying us. So far, my requests for any kind of transparency about the conduit system have been met with blank stares. We can't tell you that. It's business proprietary information. We can't tell you how many feet they're using or how much they're paying. I know I've got competitors who aren't paying anything. They're called bandit fiber providers. They put their fiber in during another construction project. Nobody wrote it down. Nobody's ever audited this system in the 10 years that I've been watching it. Right? There have been 2 promised audits, but at no time has anybody gone through the manholes and said, okay, company A is running from here to here. And so we're just going off of what an inspector saw at the time the construction was first done. So we have no idea whether the inspector left or in the middle of the project and the installer went an extra 5 blocks or an extra 5 miles. We just don't know that information, so we don't know if we're getting the money we should be getting. All the conversation so far has turned around what the rate is, but if you don't know how to apply that rate, how much fiber is actually being used, that rate is really meaningless. So I would really urge the council to take a look at auditing the conduit system and see who's in it, address the issue of bandits who are in there who are not paying for services, and get it so that everybody's paying their fair share and paying for volume, as Jason said, rather than simply the linear feet. If you're a new entrant like me, the problem that you face is that you've got a full conduit system and a city that's looking to maximize the revenue from that conduit system. And I can completely understand why you want to get as much money as you can get from BG&E. But remember that with BG&E, they can turn around and pass that right on to the consumer. They will raise their rates, get back the money, they don't care. With a company like Comcast, same thing. There was one cable TV provider in this entire city. If Comcast wants to raise the rates for cable TV, they can do it with relative impunity. But if you're looking at getting more entrants into the market for internet service providers where there's a choice, then when you hike up the conduit fees, you're essentially squeezing those people out because they're in a competitive market against Comcast, which has a lock, they have the one franchise agreement. So Comcast and Verizon and BG&E are all in a very different position. And if you want to really increase competition, you've got to really look at what you're doing with that conduit rate. Yes, you can maximize it to get back at the big guys, but the little guys are going to be left behind. You're just going to be left with the same entrants that you have in the market now. One final thing. when you guys raised the rates on BG&E, BG&E fought, we've heard about that, but BG&E did something a little bit more insidious that you've got to look into. If you go down into a manhole and you look at the conduit banks that are available in that picture, you will notice that some are for power, some are for telecom, some are for other purposes. But if BG&E decides they want a duct for power, all they need to do is put a string in and a tag that says BG&E power. BG&E gets first preference for all the ducts. So what has BG&E been doing since you guys raised the rates? They've been going around and stringing every single duct in the city that they can get a string into. What does that do for the supply of conduit for companies like ours that are looking for it? It results in no available duct found, right? This is BG&E's way to pay back what you guys have done to them by essentially monopolizing the conduit system. They've taken not just a floor of the hotel, they're taking the whole hotel because they're only going to be charged one price. And a string, correct me if I'm wrong, but a string is free. So let's please audit the system. Let's look at protecting new entrants. Let's make sure that we're getting a benefit from the conduit system and not simply trying to maximize revenue.
Here we have a question from Councilman Costello.
Yep, thank you, Hugh. One point of clarification, and please don't take offense to this, but I think it's important to point this out, especially when these hearings are on TV. It's not when you say you guys, it's not the council.
Sorry, City of Baltimore.
Yeah, fair enough. I just want to be clear on what the council has the authority and power to do and what we don't. This was a Board of Estimates action. Not that I agree with you. I'm not informed enough to have an educated opinion on that, to be frank. But anyway, going back to the bandit providers. So you know for a fact that we have people who are operating something within the conduit. They're not being charged a fee because DOT is not aware of them, essentially?
There was a company in Baltimore that was a fiber operator that decided to sell out to a larger company. And as part of that transaction, they said, we're selling 66,000 feet of fiber. And the buyer obviously had a statement in the contract that said, well, okay, we have to get certification conduits that you are being charged for 66,000 feet of fiber. They were being charged for 16,000 feet of fiber. Why? Because it's easy to put in a little extra fiber here and a little extra fiber there.
But were they? Did they actually only have 16,000? Was there any?
They sold 66,000. But imagine that you're selling it and you have to have proof from the conduit section that you actually got 66,000, but they know about 16,000. But that's an embarrassing moment for the seller, right? Because you've got to admit that you've been getting 50,000 for free.
I'm just playing devil's advocate, though, to what you said, in that the proof is what the conduit section says. But the conduit section, in that instance that you shared, was only saying that there was 16,000.
So you're paying a 16,000 foot bill, right? But fiber is coming out of Hopkins. It's coming out of the Natty Bow Tower. It's coming out of Northeast Baltimore, and it's all running back here. You can't cover those distances without 66,000 feet of.
No, I was just,
There's no question that the asset's the asset. It's just, it was never documented.
Got it.
That's why we need some kind of audit where we actually go in and say, the right way to approach it is, every company that's in the system, all 40 utilities, are going to submit a CAD drawing of everything they have. You put it all together, and you say, okay, this is the legal fiber. Somebody else goes in the manhole, and he says, this is what's been turned in. Oh, wait, this has not been turned in by any utility. Yoink, it's gone, right? Then you will see your revenue skyrocket because people will need to comply or they know that they'll be disabled. And if they're but at the moment, we don't come close to that. We're afraid to disconnect anybody's stuff. We're afraid that we don't know what it is. And so we operate in blindness.
Do we have, Victor, do we have criminal or civil penalties for theft of conduit space?
We've never explored those, and actually we're somewhat aware of what the gentleman is saying. I have to tell you that we do have a contract out to audit the system, KCI, unless Kayvon can
say that again. Say that again.
KCI, I believe we had a contract in the last 2 years to audit the system, and I believe that audit is still going on. In order, they're proofing what's out there, and we are aware that in some cases we may not know. In this particular case, we were unaware about all the footage that was in there, and we found out only during the transaction, as you're saying. So, but as I say, we have KCI is supposed to, and Kayvon, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, this is a 100-year-old system, and it is true that we don't have very good inventory of who is where. But, you know, through the KCI program management and asset management, they are identifying all that, and we are building on that to identify all the utilities that is in our conduit system.
Got it. So just to be clear, because an audit is one thing, developing an inventory through asset management is a completely different thing. So I just want to make sure, because you said audit, and you said developing an inventory through asset management. I'm paraphrasing your words. Which one are we doing?
I guess there's a distinct difference between that, but what we are doing, and Tavon, correct me if I'm wrong, is going to manholes, identifying what kind of conduits we have, who our users of those conduits are, and identifying them so that we have those in our record.
Got it. So we're building an inventory?
Inventory of all the utilities that is in
Get
our
back to you in 1
conduit system,
second.
including the condition of our conduit system and the manholes.
Okay, so yeah, so we're taking an inventory of everything we have.
That's correct.
Are we also undergoing an audit or no?
That's what he's describing is
Okay.
what I'm suggesting.
Got
yeah.
it. So we're saying the same thing. Okay, got it. And what percentage is that complete? Because like we can GIS map where every manhole in the city is, right? It's just a matter of getting a human being in each manhole to take a look.
That's correct. The inspections is the auditing process. We do what we call cable tracing, and that's where we take a particular user or owner of cable and pretty much trace their facilities throughout the system. It's a tedious process.
Sure.
But it's underway, and we're making some headway. But once we do that, we'll have the ability and the leverage to enforce removal of certain cables or charge the resulting fees, you know, from that linear footage.
That's helpful context. I appreciate what you're doing. Respectfully, back to my original question, what percentage is that complete?
It's minimal. It's probably less than 10%.
Okay. And that's the thing we started 2 years ago?
Yeah, I think that's been in place, I think, 2 years. Yeah.
How long do we expect that to take? And I'm sure that multiple years, even a decade, is possible. I'm not suggesting that you're taking too long. I'm just curious.
Well, there's a couple of things to consider. So there are over 12,000 manholes. And we can reasonably inspect perhaps close to 600 manholes per year.
That's 20 years.
Yes. However, we are entertaining and evaluating other alternatives to manhole security and to prevent and deter, unauthorized entry. So that'll kind of cease the problem while we continue the inventory.
But there's no way to speed up the inventory.
More resources to do inspection.
Hugh, one last thing, bear with me. Are we able to spend the money that we're getting as part of the MOU on ramping up our capacity to increase the pace at which we attempt to complete this inventory?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you, Hugh. I'm sorry. I got on a string there and didn't want to lose my thought.
I just want to pick up on that and put you in the hole where those tubes are. The idea that any human being can go down and positively identify all the fiber and utility users in there is kind of ludicrous, because the bandits don't label their fiber, and you don't know where the other end is. You are left with looking at something, and that's why we've done less than 10% in 2 years, you are trying to document people who are hiding from you, and they will continue to hide from you. If you want to solve this problem, make everybody turn in a GIS drawing of what they have in the conduit system. Go down into the conduit system, verify it a few times, start pulling out things that aren't on the GIS system, and those people are going to fall in line really quick. I will put a personal bet on this that you will double your revenues from conduit fees.
Tavon.
The current conduit lease agreement actually obligates these cable owners to provide that information. Some of them have been reluctant to do such, but even if they do, that means we're still relying upon their information which would inform us of what the actual linear footage should be. We don't want to rely on them. If they're hiding, then why would they provide that information to us? Which is why we do the inspections. It's the most reliable means of capturing the linear footage of these cable owners.
Got it. That's fair points on both end. So if we, I'm good, Mr. Chair. I lost my thought.
Council President.
Thank you. Tavon, I would rather have their information so that if they are stealing from us, we can find them. Because we need to just make sure that we go down and check the GIS that they give us. And if it's false and we catch one, all the rest of them will fall in line. You know, so we're going to, as the council, going to work on some legislation to really have heavy fines on those who are stealing in our conduit system. So we're going to get with whoever your legal people is, whether it's the office downstairs, to try to figure out what the fine should be, because we're going to catch them stealing. There was a company that came to me that was in our conduits doing some work and alerted me that there was a lot of stolen, wires in there where companies wasn't even telling us, and they in our system. And I brought that forward to the previous administration, and they didn't take it serious. They didn't even want to look at it. So I'm going to try to find that company again, because they located it and told us where it was. This was a good company trying to be good to us. So I do know that we have pirates in our system.
Mr. President, I agree with you. I think we should expedite creating that law that lays out the penalties for essentially for theft, and with that, give a 30-day amnesty for those who self-report that they're in our conduits illegally. And I guarantee you they would turn themselves in quickly before we start pulling their fiber out. Councilman Costello.
I agree 100%. We should get working on that tomorrow.
May I just make one request, that if this council president's question from earlier on about who's in the conduit system and what they're paying is provided, if that can be a public document, we can pretty quickly identify, if you were buying from company X and company X is not paying anything to the city for its franchise, for its conduit fees, you're dealing with a bootleg company. At the moment, the companies that are buying fiber access have no way of determining whether or not their upstream provider is actually paying the city. I'm sure companies like Under Armour want to pay a legitimate fiber company, but they can't distinguish between a legitimate paying company and a non-paying company.
Got it. Last question for Tavon. So is there anything in the settlement agreement which gives the city the ability to mandate that those utility providers who have not given us that mapping have to give it to us? Is there anything in that agreement, or Victor, in that agreement that allows us to levy a fine or some type of penalty to motivate them?
Well, it wouldn't be in the settlement agreement, but it would be in the lease agreement that we have with those providers. So who are conduit users. So at this point, I think the only penalty we have in there is that we kick you out of the system. But there is no, I don't know if there's any, I don't believe that there's a monetary penalty. I can't recall there being a monetary penalty or a misdemeanor. We call it a misdemeanor, all that kind of stuff. I don't think it's in there.
Tavon, out of the 40, you said there's about 40 utilities, or maybe you did, Mohammed. Out of those 40, how many do we have the maps for?
I don't know the exact number, but we do have information for the majority of them. The problem is that those maps are more indicative of the maps that were associated when they initiated the lease agreements.
Oh, okay, so they likely wouldn't have been updated.
That's right.
And many of those, and many of the 40 are very old. I mean, so we've got some current guys kicking in, but many of them are very old.
So do we have, Mr. President, another thing that we probably need to do, and I don't know if the appropriate way to do this is to legislate, but we need to make sure that there's some type of legal requirement for entities to either self-report or for the city to confirm I don't know what the appropriate frequency is, every 2 or 3 years, that all this information is updated so that we know what's there on our end, because obviously there's no point in you guys going through this 20-year effort to produce an inventory of what we have if people are just going to get in there and put more stuff in there and we're not going to know about it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, well, 2 chairs. Well, we're going to work with the law department along with transportation so that we can get a law that's going to be punitive, and we'll also include in there anybody that's self-report. We'll give them amnesty, but they got to true up. Ain't that the word you use, true up? Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair. Yeah. So City Code Article 26, Section 2310, penalties. Any person violating the provisions of this section shall be subject to a fine of not less than $50 nor more than $300, or to imprisonment not exceeding 12 months, or to both fine and imprisonment in the discretion of the court for each violation. And one of those potential violations would be tampering with conduits, basically saying if you don't have authorization to get in the manhole, you shouldn't be in the manhole. So we probably need to look at doing something with those penalties and bringing those into the 21st century. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So if you're one of the 40 leasees and you're watching us tonight, I would advise you to get in contact with Mr. Braxton and turn in some updated maps. If you are watching us tonight and you know that you're getting your broadband bootleg, I would advise you to find another provider. And if you're in our conduits and you're not paying the appropriate fee, we're coming to get you. If there are no more testimonies tonight, this hearing is in recess. Thank you.